Hello, I'm Dr. Bill Spady, and I'd like to tell you a little about the consulting work that I've done over my career and what's happening today and the kind of services and insights and resources that I could bring to you at this time. As many of you know, I was regarded 30 years ago as a major champion, and some even call me yet today the father of outcome-based education. Well, that was a label that got put on the work that I was doing. And yes, I was an advocate of OBE, but what I was really an advocate of is deeper educational change. Very deep systemic change, and in fact, the farther my work grew and developed, the more I realized it was really about paradigmatic change, changing the fundamental ways in which we see and define and do everything we do, whether it's in education or in business or in leadership. The paradigm, the governing way we look at everything shifted and evolved and grew and expanded for me. Well, that very thing happened with outcome-based education. OBE, as it was called, I came to realize was absolutely the opposite of a word that came bubbling out of my mouth one day at a national conference presentation I was doing. And the word was educentric. What our system was a closed system where everything we were doing in education reinforced everything else, but nothing else in the world operated the way education did. And what I was trying to do is bring a perspective and bring understandings and resources, ideas, concepts to education that didn't simply fit inside the educentric paradigm. I've just returned from a trip to the Philippines where I've had a remarkable opportunity to share some of the depth of outcome-based education with them. And it was a major surprise to the higher educators and the public educators that I addressed over a 2-week period, because what they understood outcome-based education to be is what I called CBO. And the letter CBO stood for curriculum-based outcomes, content-bound objectives, calendar-based opportunities, cellular-based organization, convention-bound orientations, and in fact there are more and more CBOs on my list. What they thought outcome-based education was taking the curriculum we already have, writing outcomes about it, creating tests for that, and making those required accomplishments for students. What I took them through was the evolution of the OBE concept as I lived it. And over a period of time, it manifested in 3 different ways. The first I call traditional outcome-based education, and that's really what CBO was. Okay? It really wasn't outcome-based, it was still calendar-based, time-based, curriculum-based, grade level-based education in which we were trying to do some things to truly improve the learning success of students and the opportunities those students had to be more successful and to show their real skills and abilities. The second phase was something we called transitional OBE eventually, and that was to pull the whole thinking and concept of education out of separate subject matters and begin to realize the ways in which those subjects all interrelated with each other and how they were all attempting to develop things we call critical thinking, effective communication, whatever it might be, complex problem solving. They weren't unique to specific disciplines. These were commonalities they all had together, and our consulting approach at that time was much more integrative and getting people to work more across discipline boundaries as teams, etc. Then the big reality came. All of this was still focused on learning that was important for educators so that students could take the next step in education. What about when they finish their education? What about the complex world, the changing, complex future they faced when they walked out the door as graduates? What were we doing about future-focused learning, not just curriculum-based learning? Well, that evolved into a major approach which we call transformational outcome-based education. And that is what I have been the champion of for at least the past 30 years, because to me, the real benefit of an education, whether you call it outcome-based or anything else, the benefit is what the learners are going to be able to do, the kind of lives they live, the qualities of humaneness that they represent, their abilities to engage effectively with other people. All of those sorts of things are really embedded in this much more complex version of outcome-based education that we called transformational. So the work that colleagues of mine and I bring to the world these days is a capacity to help educational institutions, large and small, higher education, as was the case in the Philippines, the entire higher educational system, as well as K-12 education, for people to see how could you build educational organizations, experiences for students, programs, systems around a much higher concept of learning and performance than was the case in strict academic learning. So that's one of the unique and powerful things I think we bring to the educational world, and in fact to the leadership world itself. Next, in this evolution of our work, we realized that students themselves are gifted with dozens of different what people call intelligences. Howard Gardner became very famous a couple of decades ago for identifying 7 major kinds of intelligence. Well, in 2 or 3 of my books, I lay out a little framework that I created in one day, thinking about what do the effective adults that I know, the effective world-class performers in music, golf, other areas who are friends of mine, what unique abilities and concepts do they have that academic learning doesn't touch? And it turns out that of my little simple framework of 25 things, what most people were telling me is the education system is really only honoring about a half a dozen of those. What about all the rest of this kind of talent? How do we serve it? How do we nurture it? How do we develop it? Those have all been passions of mine, deep interests, and that's all a part of the work that we do. Then finally, I will add my own inner experiences, inner growth, evolution as a human being has led me to what I call the 5th paradigm of education. And putting all of that together, what it is that we have to offer, that we'd like to share with people, can be summarized in this simple framework that I put together a number of years ago that basically said there are really 5 major paradigms of education. This represents in some ways the evolution of my career, but every one of these is a very different paradigm of how to bring education to young people, and of course it has associated with it a very different conception of outcomes and learning and what education itself is in each of these cases. So, first paradigm, I call this one-dimensional learning. Everything happens inside of your head. It's about mental processing. It's about learning content. Performance-based is where we take content and actually turn that into actionable competence. What can learners really do with content? And place the emphasis on the doing and the performing and the skill development that that takes. The third, I call life performance, all right, is about being able to function in the complex roles that we all occupy as we do our lives successfully. So this turns out to be what the academic standards paradigm turns out to be what traditional outcome-based education was. Performance-based is a little closer to transitional, but definitely what we were calling life performance outcome-based education is transformational. Beyond that is the learner, the personal empowerment program, which deals with these 25 or more kinds of intelligences that young people bring to us. And finally, inner realization of the depth of the incredible potential, the unrealized and in many cases unrecognized potential that we all have as human beings. That model is about how to cultivate that, nurture that, honor that, bring that out. With each of these paradigms is a parallel kind of leadership. And the way that leadership operates, its functional attributes, the strategies used, the basis of functioning, the empowerment it brings out in other people, differs dramatically again in each of those five. So our work, I would say, is essentially about these three right-hand paragraphs on our little teeter-totter here. Okay? It's about combining life performance, personal empowerment, and inner realization into a very dynamic, very enriching approach. How can that be developed? How can that be defined? How can that be brought to young people? And how can we continue to nurture and lead our organizations such that they develop these things and are able to manifest these things in their lives? So if this kind of vision interests you, if this kind of far-reaching probe into the depths of human potential, human talent, human intelligence, is something you want to bring to your educational institution in a deeper way, please contact us. Thank you.